All right, greetings everybody. So this is a very short, hopefully about 45 minutes recording of intro to Maya. So in this, I'm going to go over just all the little various elements. This is typically the stuff that I go over with when I'm ramping students up for like the environment modeling class or the character modeling class or um, virtual worlds if somebody doesn't know how to use Maya. Um, all right, so basically, I start out with just a talk, just a little bit about Maya. I remember using it. First time I saw it was back in 1995 when a friend of mine at the first company I was working at was working with it, and he was like, "This is the next big thing." So it took a little bit of time, about 5 years before I started working in it, and I've been working on it since about 2000. And it's weird to say that I love a program, but I just love Maya. I don't know what it is. It just feels like a real grown-up program. So looking at it, this is the main interface. So this is the stuff you see a whole lot. So I'm going to go over the things that you see, the menus. This is the main viewport that we look at. And in the main viewport, we have a small little set of menus here. And these can show various elements of it. Wireframe on shaded, you can show different lighting, you can show certain objects that are in it, you can show how to render it, this screen, etc. I'm a big proponent of using keyboard commands, so a lot of these guys, I don't even know what they are, I just use keyboard commands. This is the grid that's in the screen, so nothing is in the scene. This is a little thing here called the channel box, which is where you'll see information about your object. It's good to always have the channel box open rather than other like the attribute editor. And to get the channel box, you have this little tiny button way up here underneath the lock. And that's good to keep that open. So that's the channel box. These are layers, which you don't have to worry about until later. This is the outliner, and this shows you everything that's in the scene. Important to have that there. You can toggle this guy on and off by clicking on this little thing here, and it'll turn it on and off. Up here is our shelf. This holds commands that we use quite a lot. There's a big menu structure in Maya. So you can put your custom commands up here by a few shortcut keys that will put them up there. So there's custom, and then there's other little shelves for other elements. I usually just stick to custom and just remember where everything else is. These are a bunch of buttons that I don't know what they are because I use the keyboard commands. And this is your main menu up here, and this is the subset. So this shows whatever you're doing. If you're modeling, if you're rigging, if you're animating, you're doing effects, you're rendering, it will change the menu. However, I don't use this one too often because there is another nice thing about Maya, this little pop-up menu, and this shows you everything. And I find myself, whenever I go to this, I click the control key just to make the window active for some reason. But I just hold down the space bar, and then it gives me this command. So I'm holding down the space bar. There's a few weird things about Maya that you'll get used to. It has some little toggle buttons on it, D, X, and V, and the space bar. That will do various things. So in here we see all of the menus, all the things that you can do. It seems, oh my darn, my screen up here is showing it in, oh, okay, there we go. I have another monitor up here, which sometimes it displays it down there, up there rather. I have them stacked. Anyways, and then you can also change the viewport. If you click on this little Maya right here, you click on perspective view, you get that. You click on front view, you get orthographic view here. So this is the main menu, or the main screen rather. I'm going to go back to perspective. And then let's just so that you know what the other parts of the interface are, let's look at these other guys. So other elements. So down here, you'll see this. This is a timeline. This is how you put in rough draft stuff for your animations. This is the this shows where you're starting, where how much you're showing, so you can make it larger or smaller. You can put in your the end time of the playback range, etc., etc. Frames per second, auto keying, animation settings. This is a thing called Mel scripting, and you can do coding in it to automate some functions. You can even put up little windows and have custom scripts, and I haven't done a whole lot of that, but there's some people that really specialize in it, and they're very valuable at companies. This is a status window over here that'll show you what's going on. This will also bring up your scripting, and you can see all the actions that are going on at the time. But blah, blah, blah. Anyways, just to show you what that stuff is. So when the other windows that you might use are, let's see here, we have Windows, we have modeling editors, we have a thing called a UV editor, which hopefully I'll get to in this little session. And the UV editor shows how a two-dimensional texture is applied to the three-dimensional object. Usually when the UV editor starts up, this toolkit is disconnected annoyingly, so you always have to connect it back in. If you can't find it, it's easy to go to one of these guys, to Tools, Hide UV Toolkit, and then Show UV Toolkit, and then it'll show it, and you're good to go. But a lot of commands can occur, you can get in here, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then there's another window called the Hypershade, and that is in rendering editors. And this is how you create all of your shaders. So in your shaders, this is how you will apply them to components like faces or the full object. One shader holds a texture or a layer of textures. But in general, when we work in like game 240 and 230, we're just using Lambert shaders. So very simple shaders. So we'll see all the shaders over here. We'll see a demonstration of what it looks like on an object. We'll see the nodal structure over here, and we'll see the properties right over here. So that's that for now. All right, so with all that stuff in mind, hopefully somewhere floating around there, let's look at how to move around in the screen. I often start with a little calisthenics, and so I hold up the pop-up menu, and then I create, and most of the time we're doing polygon primitives. Don't really work in NURBS very much. So I'm going to start with a cube, easiest thing to do. So to start with, we have that cube right in the middle. Let's press the letter F. And if you press the letter F, it focuses in on that one object. Now, to move around the screen, everything you do to move around the screen, you always hold the Alt key down. So you hold the Alt key down, and to rotate, you hold the left mouse button. So Alt, left mouse button, and you can rotate this object in all these different degrees. You'll notice that that if you look down here, you can see the coordinate system. We have Z coming over here, we have X going over there, we have Y going up. So we can see that I'm rotating around Y there, and sort of rotating around Z. That old gimbal lock is going to really give you some issues. But anyways, enough about gimbal. So now we have panning, and panning is also done with the Alt button. And we hold down Alt, and then I usually put my index finger on the middle mouse button, and then I pan it all around like so. This may seem very simple, but this will eventually get to be just second nature. It's awesome. So that's panning, and Alt and right mouse button, and I usually do that with my middle finger. And left and right, I'm moving the mouse, and you pan it just or you zoom it like that. So I always tell the students, don't use the middle mouse scroll button. It's a easy thing to do, but when you get used to holding down Alt, left mouse button, middle mouse button, right mouse button, it gets to be a whole lot easier. All right. So with that in mind, let's look at this. We have this object that's just created. And over here on the left, we see pCube1 in our outliner. So that's our first object in the whole scene. And like I said with the channel box, we have all the information about this object right over here. We have translate XYZ, rotate XYZ, scale XYZ. We also have a thing over here called inputs, and it's kind of hidden here. But if you click on this, this will show you the initial state of the object, and it shows you the subdivisions. If we had more subdivisions, we can create it like that. We can change the subdivisions there. I'm just clicking on the number and then moving it left and right, and then we can change that number. But we'll keep it at that for now. All right, so now we can also move this object in the world, and we move it by using Q, W, E, and R. Well, actually, we modify it. Q, W, E, and R, and you can see over here when I do that, that these are changing. These are this is the select, which is Q. This is the move. This is rotate. This is scale. So get used to the key commands. We'll start with Q. If you press Q, you select it, you've selected it. You click off of it, it's deselected. If we press W, we get this little thing here called a gizmo. And this thing we use to move the object around in 3D space. So I'm clicking right here on this axis, on this particular axis. And that will make it move along that axis. I can click on this axis and move it. I can click on this axis and move it. Now there's ones in between, and this is a combination of axes. So if I click on this one, it's using these two axes. So it's going to move it around like that. If I click on this one, it's going to do this one and this one. And this one, it's going to do this one and this one. If I click right in the middle, which you often don't want to do, you don't really know what it's going to do because it's moving it around via the viewport screen. Sometimes it's important. Sometimes you don't want to do that. Now if we press E, and you'd think that this would be R because it's rotate, we get the gizmo for rotating. And you see these lines over here. These replace the gizmo for the moving, but it's still based on axes. So we can see the color is representative of the axes here. We have green, that represents the y-axis. We have red, represents the x-axis. We have blue, that represents the z-axis. And we have this one outside of it, which represents the current viewport, which, again, we don't really want to do. So we can move it around with holding on to one of these axes. Notice also in the channel box that the number is changing. That rotate Z is going up and down. And if I go here for the X, it's changing the number for rotate X. And then for Y, well, since we have those at different ones, there we go. Now it's, I had to zero those out for gimbal lock. And then we can also put these numbers in here. I can put in 0, 0, 0, and then we've just gone back to our original location. If we press R, that's scaling, and again we have a different set of gizmo, and right in the middle we can scale it all symmetrically. So X, Y, and Z are changing their size, and scale X, Y, and Z always start out as 1. And we can scale it along this one, make it super flat. We can even reverse it. We can scale it along this one, we can scale it along this one, and we can also scale 2 together, which gets some interesting results. Or we can zero it out, put 1, 1, 1 in there, and we're back to normal. So that is the start of moving and rotating and scaling and selecting. Now with all that in mind, we're going to do something a little bit more advanced. All of these things you'd have to practice a little bit to get really good at, but let's move on to the next thing, which is actually texture mapping. So what we need to do is we need to go to Google or wherever, and we look for a crate texture. So I already found one. I have crate texture, and I'm just going to choose this first one that comes up, and that's pretty good, although I kind of like this one better, even though it does have the little symbol on it. So I'm going to take that one and I'm going to save it, and I'll save it right onto my desktop, or maybe I'll put it onto this one over here. So here we go. This is going to be create texture. And I'm saving it as a JPEG. Make sure you save it as a JPEG. And that one's there. Then I'm going to go into Maya. And remember, we were working in the Hypershade. And that's how you make a shader. So we're going to put that create texture into a shader. So I hold down the spacebar to the pop-up menu. I go to Windows. I go to Rendering Editors. I go to Hypershade. And there it comes up. It thinks a little bit there for a second, or pretends to. So in order to create a shader, there's a bunch of ways we can do it. I often like to right click in this black area here, and it brings up what's called a context menu. And I go to create, and then I go to materials, and then I go over here down to Lambert, and that creates this shader ball here called Lambert 2. So it's a very, very good habit to name your objects and name your shaders. So I'm going to call this create underscore text. Maya does not like spaces. Neither does Unreal in many regards. So we have that. Now underneath it we have color, transparency, ambient color, incandescence. So here we're just going to worry about color. And what we do is we need to, I'm going to bring this forward. I just pressed F and that brought that forward. That's our little shader node structure. This is our main shader. So what we need to do is we need to create a file node in here. So to do that, we click on this little checkerboard right next to color. And what that does is bring something off the screen. Bring it down. It brings up a bunch of nodes that we can add. So in it, we have right here this list, the fourth list from the item from the top, which is file. And I click right on that. And it attaches a file node and a texture place node. We're only going to worry about this one, and that's the current one selected. We have over here in our properties image name, and we click right over here, and then we go and look for our object. So I clicked on that folder, and then I click on desktop or my computer, and I go to, nope, I don't go to that. How many hard drives do I have? I'm not sure. Secondary. There we go. And then I go over here, and then I look for create texture. So wherever you saved it, go to it. There's our create texture. So I open that up, and the texture is in here. You can see it now on the little shader ball. I usually like to change it up to the teapot because I think that's pretty funny. There's a history behind that. And there's a bunch of other ones that you can choose. You can see it has an ocean kind of texture there. But I'm going to put it onto the teapot because that's my favorite. So we have that one there. We have this node currently selected. However, we want to apply this to this cube. So I click on the cube first. Now, here comes a little bit of a tricky part. You right-click on, you don't right-click on it, you right-click and hold. So you right-click and hold, and then you move it up to assign material to selection. So if you clicked on it, this would become selected, this would become deselected. But I did it correctly. However, you see that there is no texture on here. And the reason for that is we start off in shaded mode. We need to actually press 6 to turn on the texture. So 6 on the keyboard turns on the texture, 5 is shaded mode, 4 is wireframe. So 6, we see that. Now you might wonder, why is this not looking the way that we want it to look? And that's because the UVs for the object are not set up right. So the other window that we looked at, which was the UV editor, we go over here to Windows, we go to Modeling Editors, and we go to UV Editor, and it brings this up. So here's our 2D texture that is from our shader. Now this is the default set of UVs. So U goes along here, V goes along here, and what we need to do is we need to create a better set of UVs for this. There's a lot of ways to make UVs. My favorite is to use the thing called normal based. which sounds like something that you would do for turkey on Thanksgiving. But for this, the best thing to do is use the thing called automatic. So with this one selected, I click on automatic, and then it does this. So it's moved these guys over here and done this pretty looking thing here. So it still doesn't look the way we want it to look. But what we need to do is we need to click on each one of these. So I click on one, I press W, I'm going to move it right on top of the other. I'm going to click on this and move it right on top of that. Click on this, move it right on top of that. Click on this, move it on top of that. Don't worry if these are not exactly correct. Exactitude is not fully important right now. So everything is all on top of itself. Now, what we do is we draw a frame around these guys, or also called a marquee. And this is by going to the top left of the object and going down to the bottom right. And so when you do that, and I'm just holding down my left mouse button, and now it selects all of these guys. So I'm just going to bring this down right into the middle. I'm going to press R for scaling, and then I'm going to scale it all the way up like that. And then I'm going to press W, and I'm going to move it up a little bit like that. So now don't worry about this too much. That's it. I deselect over there, and then I close this here, and here we see our cube, or our crate. All right, so this is the first object that you've created. Now we've only so far worked in the full object. We haven't gone inside of the object. And you might say, what are you talking about inside the object? I'm inside the object right now. But no, this is object mode, and then there's a thing called component mode. So to add to that, we have some keyboard commands that start with F8, F9, F10, and F11. So F8 will make you go into your object mode. It'll kind of toggle between object component. F9 is for your verts, or your vertices. Not vertexes, it's vertices. One vertex, two vertices. Then 10 is your edge mode, and 11 is your face mode. So we'll start with vert mode, which is F9. And when you go into vert mode, you can see that we have these little vertices that are now like purple. And so when you hover over them, they get highlighted. So this is where we can draw the marquee around and select more than one. So I can do that, and I've selected those two. Or I can just click on one, and I've just selected one. So if I click on one, and I have pressed W, I can move this vert around. And you can see it's doing some weird things to the texture. That's called texture stretching. You've probably seen some bad texture stretching in games in your time. That's things that environment artists try to avoid, but sometimes they get through. All right, I'm going to undo that. Now if I go to this corner like this, and remember to rotate, you're doing Alt left mouse button, Alt middle mouse button, Alt right mouse button. And if I do a marquee around these two verts, or vertices, I have both of them selected. Now if I press W, you'll notice that this gizmo is right between the two, so it averages everything up. And I can move both of those two. I can rotate both of them. I could scale both of them. So it's pretty neat like that. And undo that. Now edge mode, if we press F10, what I often suggest is having a little sticker next to your keyboard, or on your keyboard, that shows the different, like F8, F9, F10, F11. I have a nice PDF that also shows all the key commands. So edge mode, as you can see here, these are all edges. So if I hover over one of these edges, it becomes highlighted. So if I click on this edge, you see that the gizmo is right in the middle. I can move that edge all around. I can move it this way, like that. I can move it up, etc., etc. I can scale it. So it's just almost like selecting both of those verts at the same time. And so this can be handy. I could also select these two edges by holding down Shift with this one selected, that one, and hold Shift, and then I have those two selected, so I can move two of those guys at the same time. That's pretty weird. And then the last one is F10. I'm sorry, F11, and that's face mode. And so face mode is used quite a lot. And this way we just move one whole face all the way around. That's pretty neat. You can scale that. You can rotate it. And all that jazz. So that is the basics for 3D in Maya. The very, very basics for manipulating objects. What I want to show you just before we finish this, I want to show you what it's like when we add faces to this. So what we'll do is let's go press F11 and we'll go into face mode. We'll click on one of these faces. And then we'll do two commands that will make new faces. One is the extrusion, and we can extrude a face. You can extrude also an edge, but you cannot extrude a vert. Then the second one is a thing called multicut, and multicut is a very handy tool for creating all kinds of stuff. A friend of mine at LucasArts said that he basically creates everything from a cube using extrusion and multicut. So what we'll do is, with this face selected, we'll press Control and E. And when we press Control E, you'll see a bunch of these things pop up, some crazy stuff here. We have not only like our rotation, but we also have the move gizmo, and we have the scaling gizmo, and we have this little thing here which toggles between extruding in the world axis or the normal axis, which is something that if you do some more stuff with Maya will make more sense. So for now, we're just going to leave that there. And what we'll do is we're going to grab onto the move gizmo here, and we're just going to grab that and we're going to move it out. So when I move it out, you'll notice that this texture is really strange. What that texture is basically the very tip of this edge just stretched along the whole side there. So that's why it's just the same pixel going along each side. So that is an extrusion. We can extrude multiple things, any kind of face that we have here. I could take this face here, I'm going to zoom out, and I press Control E, and then I extrude that up like that. I could scale it in like that. I could select that one, press Control E, grab onto this little move gizmo, move it down like that. I could scale it up. Excuse me. So that is our extrusion. Now the other one is multicut, and multicut is super, super handy. There's a few ways to get to it. My favorite way to get to it is the keyboard command, and that is Control Shift X. So when we do that, we get the little X-Acto blade, and that's our multicut. Now we can still rotate and move and pan and zoom and all that kind of stuff. Now you'll notice when I hover over part of this object that that there's a line that occurs when I'm in the middle of it. However, when I'm at a vert, there's no line. When I'm at an edge, there's also no line. So this means it's going to start cutting wherever I first click. So say I want to click, I want to start cutting right on the middle of this edge. So I click once, And now it's moving around saying you're going to cut right over here. So I'm going to click over here. Now we have a little line there. And you don't want to do a whole lot of cuts inside this face. Just a few is alright. And over there. And then I'm going to click over here on the end of this to end it. And I'm going to click on the edge. And then to end the whole thing, I press Enter. That ends it, but I'm still in the tool, so I press W to get out of the tool. So now we have a cut on that face. And whereas it was one face, now it's two faces. So I can select one of these faces, and I can press Control E and zoom out a little bit, and then I'm going to drag this out. And now you see that cut that we made is now influencing the face that we are that we just extruded. Now, an important thing also to remember, if we are inside of the object right now. So remember I said before that there was object mode and that there were component modes. So we may want to go out of this whole object and do some modification to it. Say we want to rotate the whole thing 90 degrees. So if I want to do that, I have to press F8, and that goes into object mode, and now the whole thing is selected. Notice also here that we have inputs, and we have a bunch of stuff over here. This is called the history, and sometimes that can get very full, and we have to delete the history, which kind of I don't know, boils it down to what is right there on the screen. So we're in object mode, and now if we press E, we can rotate the whole thing. Notice how it's moving in the rotate X. So I'm going to rotate it down this way, where it's like 90 degrees rotated, almost. It's at 91.223. I'm going to click on that number, and I'm just going to type in 90. And now it's exactly rotated 90 degrees. So we cut that one piece. Now there's another thing that you can do with multi-cut, which is super, super handy. And that is you can create things called edge loops. So you could essentially, I'm going to go into it again, Control Shift X. You could in here just cut, 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 and cut, and enter, and W, and now we have that. But I'm going to undo that. There's another way to do to make an edge loop like that. Control Shift X to go into multi-cut, and I hold down Control, and now you can see it's going to create an edge loop anywhere I want it. So I can create a whole ton of edge loops. But you'll also notice that if I go on to one of these edge loops, it's creating another edge loop on a different axis. So I can click over here, and I can add a bunch of edge loops along there. So I get some really neat stuff by doing multi-cut. And I can do the same thing down here. I can hold down Control, Control. I can also hold down Shift, and it will toggle through stepwise in I think about like 10 degrees or 15 or something. I don't know what. So that's a little bit another way to be exact. I could then press W to finish it, and then I can press F9, and I can zoom in a little. Now notice I'm getting close and to this. I'm going to press 4, the number 4, and I can see this is what our object looks like in wireframe. And I'm looking on the side of this edge loop here, and then I'm going to do a marquee around it, just like that. And with that, I've selected that whole edge loop over there, so the front ones and the back ones. I'm going to press 6 and go back into textured mode, and then I'll press R for scaling, and then I can scale those guys in like that and change it around. So that's the basics of using Maya. You'd be amazed at the things that you can do just by those tools that I just showed you. In my Game 240 class, it takes a while for all that stuff to sink in, but we have a lot of fun doing it. And You can create whole worlds with all this stuff. Of course, there's a lot of different things that you can create. There's effects that you can use. There's all kinds of different texture methods. There's also some lines that you can create and have shapes like lathe around them or rotate around them or revolve and things like that. We can also animate stuff. I guess I can show you just a little bit of how that might work. Let's create a ball in the last like 10 minutes that we have here. You're just going to move this guy over here, and I'm holding down Alt and the middle mouse button. So I'm going to go to our pop-up menu with the space bar, and I'll go to Create and Polygon Primitives, and then I'll create a sphere. So there's our sphere. I'm going to press W, and I'm going to move that out of the way, just like that. And then with that set, I'm going to press the letter S. And when I press the letter S, you can see that this little red line showed up there. And then you can see that red showed up all over here. This means that it's now, these numbers are being controlled by the timeline over here. So 1 is our keyframe over there. Then I'm going to move it all the way up to, see, we're at 24 frames per second. So I'm going to go to 24. So I just clicked and dragged. And then I'm going to just click and hold on this and move it a little bit. And I have auto key on, so it keyed it. But normally all you'd have to do is press S, and that would key it. And then I'm going to move that up to 48. There's 48. And then after I did that moved it to 48, I'm going to put in the numbers here to 0, 0. Oh, no, I didn't want to do that. I thought it was going to go right back. I'm going to move that instead to just somewhere over here. And that's going to be it. So I've moved that around, and I've done 3 keys. And then if I click right over here, oh, and wherever you move it, you have to press S. That will key it the 3rd time. So I'm going to move it back over here, and now if I scroll along over here, you can see that our little sphere is moving. So that's a very short animation. We can press play, and it will cycle through this whole timeline, and then it'll jump back to the beginning. And that's the very basics of animation. You can also see how your animation looks in a thing called the graph editor. But if you ever take the GMMD 351, the 3D animation, or animation techniques, GMMD 420, then you can learn how to do animation with Maya. So I hope this has been interesting, and if you have any questions, I'm sure there's some 3D skilled people in your class, or you can email me. My name is Morgan Hastings, and I hope you have enjoyed this very much. Have a good one. Take care.